Okay. Well, let me try to figure out why I have no sound. Okay, I'm going to quit Skype and restart it. Call me back in afterwards.
Okay.
Sucker. We'll never call him back in.
This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 27 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have AJ O'Neill.
Coming at you live from the German fortress of Bettendorf, Iowa.
You know, you say coming at you live every week, and it's always time delayed. I mean, that's a podcast, right?
At least it's not coming at you dead from the zombie apocalypse or something.
I'm live right now, okay? And I'm in a town called Bettendorf that sounds like it should be in Germany, but it's in Iowa.
Okay. We also have Jameson Dance.
Hi guys, I'm just in Utah still.
Utah. Woohoo! We have Joe Eames.
Coming at you, I guess, live from a closet at Domo.
Sweet. What are you doing in the closet, Joe?
I'm not getting baited by that.
I'm Charles Maxwood from devchat.tv. So we were discussing what we were going to talk about this week because I've been a little bit of a slacker and haven't had the time to... So I guess I'm not a slacker. I've been too busy, but I haven't had a chance to plan out episodes for the next few weeks. So we were talking and... Jameson mentioned that we could talk about the community, and I said, yeah, the community kind of confuses me, and I think I got an in-chat chuckle from that. And then anyway, so I thought, you know, let's talk about it. Let's see if we can make sense of this thing, because it seems like there are, from what I can tell, like different, there are almost like different opinions, not opinions, communities out there. It's kind of fragmented. You have like the people that follow everything that Douglas Crockford says, and then you have the other people that follow everything that Brendan Eich says, and you have the other people who agree with somebody else, and then some people are talking about Node, and some people are talking about the browser, and even within the browser, some people are talking about jQuery, and some people are talking about anything but jQuery. Am I reading this wrong? Is it really kind of that messy, or am I missing something?
You summed it up pretty well, and I think that's part of what makes JavaScript really exciting. Part of that comes from the fact that it's so large. You have these people that have been doing JavaScript since 95, and you also have lots of people who are very new to it. And some of them are really new to programming as well and are kind of just getting started, but you also have people, Node brought over a lot of people from other language communities who are bringing in good ideas from other platforms to JavaScript. So it all kind of just like, yeah, very true. But it's so large and there's so much churn in it, I guess, that there's always something exciting going on. And I think we always praise NPM and how awesome it is. And that's like a direct result from people coming in from other languages that have solved package management in different and harder to use and develop for ways. So there's lots of benefit, I think, to having this wide variety of experiences.
And is there truly a more ubiquitous language than JavaScript? I mean, it's so cross-discipline, community. It's like it's just barely getting to have its own community because so many people that are in the JavaScript community are really in another community. They're in the Java community or
they're designers or something.
Yeah, exactly. So they're already from their own community, and then they come into this, start doing more and more and more JavaScript and getting more and more involved in JavaScript. And so it's just this crazy amalgamation of people.
I think that's why there are so many just like cool mad science projects. Like I saw the other day that Firefox or Mozilla, I guess, has taken this 3D game engine, like Sauerbraten 2 or something. I guess it's used for a couple of open source 3D first-person shooters, and they have it running inside the browser so they can benchmark WebGL and their JavaScript engine for running 3D games. There's also this group of people who are doing lots of robotics with JavaScript. I think Rick Waldron is, I don't know if he's the head guy, but he's definitely involved in that and has given some talks on it. So there's like the robots.js people that have figured out how to communicate on like serial cables to their Arduino robots and stuff. I don't know. There's just like, what other language can a designer who knows very little programming make a little button move? And you can also have some guy doing like statistical processing of huge tons of information. Just seems really cool.
Did you say make a little button move or make a little butt move?
Depends on the designer.
I must be ill. I'm not thinking straight. Sorry. Yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, I mean, you know, since you have so many different things going on, I mean, how do you know which ones are most relevant to what you're doing? So, for example, I mean, when I was really new to JavaScript, and by really new, I'd been programming in it a couple of years, but it really only scratched the surface of what jQuery gave you. You know, I didn't know anything about any of these guys, and I didn't know, you know, why the different opinions were so important to people.
Go ahead, Joe.
Rephrase the question.
Yeah, rephrase the question.
So basically, it's, you know, so how do I figure out essentially who's right or who's right for me to be paying attention to? I mean, should everybody be paying attention to Crockford, or are there certain people that, you know, should become involved in a different part of the community?
I don't think everybody should pay attention to one person, because if you do, then, you know, now you're one thing that's just great about, as we were talking about JavaScript, is that there's so many wide, you know, disciplines coming in and bringing in their influence into JavaScript. And so you don't want it to become uniform. It needs to stay heterogeneous.
Right.
I think everybody should at least watch the 8 videos that Crockford has. I mean, whether or not you subscribe to his religion or not, you should at least watch it, because there's a lot of valuable information there. Same thing with the jQuery guy. You should at least get on his blog and go through some of the most popular posts that he's got, because there's some really valuable information there.
You talking about John Resig?
Yeah, John Resig. Sorry, shouldn't have just called him the jQuery guy like that. That's just
Then you have to call Crockford the JavaScript guy, right?
The Yahoo ECMAScript guy.
The grumpy
Who
guy.
went to PayPal, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that yet.
Yeah, he went a couple months ago. I also think, I mean, I'm like sort of tangentially part of the Ruby community. Ruby was one of the languages I used when I was getting started. And it seems like they're a lot more unified, both for better and for worse. So
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe Chuck, you could compare and contrast them, because you're much more involved in Ruby than I am. But yeah, it seems like people are interested in a lot of the same things. And like right now, there's this big focus on software engineering and object-oriented stuff going on in the Ruby community, where JavaScript is just kind of way more diverse. And I don't know, you don't get a sense that there's one thing that people are really into right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. I think every community has, you know, the little groups out there that are doing their own thing and exploring areas that are, you know, a little bit different from sort of the mainstream in whatever, you know, language or community that's out there. And Ruby definitely has those, but it seems like at RubyConf and at RailsConf, you know, you do tend to get more of a homogenous message from the different talks that you attend. People tend to care about the same things, and a lot of it does kind of center around, you know, good coding practices and things like that, more than certain idioms of the language or you know, a certain style or whatever. Everybody seems to adopt the same sort of coding style. But you know, and I think that's one of the things that really threw me off with the JavaScript community was just that, you know, I come in and it's like in Ruby, if you come in, you know, you can kind of get an idea of who the innovators are out in the space and what they're up to, and, you know, and then you can figure out who's doing the stuff that you're really interested in. And in JavaScript, it just felt way more fragmented, and there's a lot more noise out there that you have to sort through before you can kind of figure out where you have to live and what's really going on that's important or interesting to you. So,
well, I see that as a plus, because it's not that there's more noise, it's that there's more stuff happening. Like,
right. Within
one language, you have really, I guess not innovative. People are going to yell at me and tell me event-driven programming on the server has been around for forever. But a really innovative, easy way to do event-driven programming in Node and all these other cool things that it brings, like streams and just sweet stuff like that, but also really advanced front-end stuff. So I think it's cool to be able to sit in one language and do so many different things, because I I get bored if I stay doing one thing for forever. Like if I was just a front end guy, I would get pretty bored. So that's a positive thing for me.
Yeah, I can see that. At the same time, though, I mean, I think if people who are new to the community can kind of get lost, it's not as not everything's as available to them, I don't think.
You're saying it's not as cohesive. Like if you just want to learn how to do front end stuff, you don't really know where to turn when you're first starting out.
No. So for example, if you come into Ruby, you know, everybody kind of pushes you down the same track. You know, here are some of the things that you need to look at. Here are some of the ways that you get involved. You know, here are some of the things that pretty much everybody has tried that you ought to look at. And in JavaScript, since everybody's working on such disparate projects, you know, it's like, well, that all depends. Do you want to use Node? Do you want to work in the browser? Do you care about jQuery? Do you not? Do you know, are you looking for more code organization stuff? Are you looking for, you know, frameworks that get this stuff out of your way? And anyway, it's just, you know, there's not a clear path, which, you know, is definitely both a good thing and a bad thing. But I almost feel like you need somebody who understands sort of where you want to be at, and then they can kind of point you in the right direction, as opposed to in Ruby, you start looking and you tend to get referred to the same places to get started.
So I have an interesting question about Ruby, Chuck. I heard that as a whole, the Ruby community has kind of moved away from active record. Is that true?
I think it really depends. I still use it in Rails. It's just there are a lot of people out there, though, that like some of the other ones. And if you're doing NoSQL, obviously you can't use active records. So you have to use something else. But I don't know. I think a lot of people just go with what the default is in Rails.
I didn't mean to sideline the conversation or, you know, shoot off on a tangent here. I was just kind of trying to compare in my mind, you know, what you were saying about the Ruby community to JavaScript, because like in JavaScript, you know, there's no clear winner on not only within the MV star frameworks, but should you be using an MV star framework?
Right.
And so I was just kind of wondering, you know, is Ruby the community as a whole? Does it move from, you know, things that are popular now and then they become passe as people realize, oh, that's not as good of an idea? I mean, I know that in other languages they consider an active record pattern to be not as effective as like a repository pattern. So I just, you know, kind of maybe the communities aren't quite as fractured as or, you know, as different Ruby versus JavaScript as you think. Because if it's like that in Ruby, that hey, we can all still use Rails or use active record in Rails, then in JavaScript, you know, it's kind of, isn't it the same thing? We got these groups that are doing different things, and
I think you're right. I think mostly, you know, there are different people out there doing different things. It just seems like when you get started, though, you get sent down the same path as everybody else to kind of get to learn it. The other thing, though, is that when I started getting involved in the Ruby community in earnest, I started going to the conferences, and I haven't really been able to go to any JavaScript conferences yet.
Right.
And so, you know, that might change my view on the community a little bit, just because I get to actually go and interact with JavaScript developers and really kind of get a feel for, you know, the kinds of things that they're talking about when you get a few hundred of them together.
Right. I think that one of the things that sets apart the JavaScript community is the fact that it's moving from unsophisticated to sophisticated solutions. And so the community, it just reacts in a funny way to that, where in other languages, you kind of start off building sophisticated solutions right from the get-go. In JavaScript, we've been building all these unsophisticated solutions for so long. It's like, oh, I just want to make, you know, the button flash. I want scrolling text. And nowadays, we're trying to write entire applications across both the client and server in one language. And so the solutions are getting really sophisticated as a community. People are reacting to that pressure in many different ways and bringing what they have in their, you know, former communities over and trying to figure out how to solve these problems.
Yeah, I think that was what really kind of got me interested in JavaScript, was that it's like, okay, look, you know, there are all of these interesting and amazing things that are moving forward and kind of advancing the art in JavaScript that, you know, before it was just, you know, these, you know, you'd put a little script tag in with a couple of lines that, yeah, you'd put a click handler in there and that was about it, you know. Well,
one of the things that I love, and I think I love about the JavaScript community more than the other communities that I've been involved in I was involved in the .NET community fairly heavily, is I think the JavaScript community is just more exciting. And I think I've said this to many other people. I may not have said this on the show, but JavaScript's the most exciting language to be working. It's the Wild West. This is the frontier. This is so many things are being pioneered right now in JavaScript. And it's just
Don't you mean the Wild Wild West?
Exactly.
Then you have to start rapping.
We are all in the Wild Wild West right now, except for AJ, who's in the Wild Wild Midwest.
He's in the boring corn.
Midwest.
That was a less successful rap song.
I heard somebody once say that computer science and astronomy are the only two sciences anymore that an amateur can make a significant landscape-changing contribution to. And
interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. We got everybody listening to this podcast and everybody out there programming and banging away on JavaScript. Some of these people are going to come up with stuff that's just going to change the landscape of how we do stuff. And it's a guy in his garage can make a change where, in civil engineering, nobody in their garage is going to change how we do civil engineering. It's
right.
Or in finance,
Maybe with 3D printers. I don't know.
Oh, that does sound very promising.
So I was just playing the Mozilla demo. It's called Banana Bread, instead of listening for a couple minutes, and it's really amazing. You guys should check it out. Also, what Joe was saying about the community being exciting, I was talking with an iOS developer that we have here, and he's a fantastic developer. And he's done a little bit of JavaScript, and he said that it's so much more dynamic. Like, iOS has this thing called CocoaPods, which is basically like a proto package manager in a really primitive state, and it's just barely getting started. And there's not as much community involvement or community projects because people just kind of use what Apple gives them. So I agree with Joe that there's tons of people just working on cool stuff, and that's why it's so exciting.
Yeah, I have to ask, Joe, you've been involved in the .NET community. Is part of the reason that the communities are different because it is kind of a corporate-centered or corporate-driven product with .NET and Visual Studio? Does that change the landscape a lot, or is it really the developers that are part of the community?
That's a good question. I really do think that that the Microsoft community is dominated by the Microsoft-centric view, and people that are really active in the Microsoft community are definitely a little bit more forward-thinking, but the community at large, I think, suffers from Microsoft solved this. I don't need to worry about solving it myself.
Right.
And it suffers so heavily.
Or Microsoft didn't solve this. It must not need to be solved.
I've definitely seen less of that, but certainly there's got to be some of that too. But as a great example, as I've many, many, many times said, TFS is a whole suite that does like 4 different things, and it does them all just okay. And so everybody's like, well, Microsoft produced this product, let's just use that rather than, let's use a different source control, like let's use Git instead of TFS. And let's use a different CI system, and let's pick the best of breeds. We're all picking just the one that's okay, and we're not solving. So it's hard, to tie things together. Nobody's out there. Hey, I solved the using Git, on Windows long ago, which they have solved that. People finally have solved that and using Git well. And using Git with TFS is still painful. They don't solve these problems because they feel like Microsoft solved this for us. And so they're not, I don't think that the community by and large is thinking for themselves as far as I'm going to go out and solve a problem that exists and I'm going to make it open source when I publish it. And that whole open source mindset, I really laud Microsoft recently for going far more open source. They created this subcorporation that's doing just open source, and their whole charter is to make Microsoft products integrate well with open source products. I think that's a great thing for them to do, not just for their profit margins, but also for the community as a whole, because Microsoft does make good products. They do. They also make crappy products. And so community members in the Microsoft community aren't thinking, I'm not happy with this, I'm going to go and solve it my own. And in the JavaScript community, man, it's fantastic like that. I like this way that this guy solved it, but he didn't do it well enough. I'm going to do it better.
Yeah, it seems
it's also kind of a curse too. I mean, there are like 30 bajillion different testing frameworks out right now, and none of them have won.
Yeah, but
so you do get a lot of duplication of effort, but
yeah, but at the same time, I mean, just to give you an example from the Ruby community, I mean, we have Test Unit, and then we have RSpec, and somebody else came out and wrote Minitest, which was kind of a newer, faster, cooler version of test unit. And, they basically have built shims over the top of it so you can make your Minitest stuff look like RSpec. And some of the areas that RSpec has innovated in have trickled over into the other testing libraries. So having that wide breadth isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, sometimes it would be nice if you could get more of a concerted effort on something that really just rocked. But at the same time, all these different people are innovating in their own way and, finding different things that just really, kick butt and are awesome. And then the other testing frameworks will pick them up and use them and run with them. And then you wind up with something that's a little bit better that may not have happened if all 5 or 6 guys that were working on separate things went off and did their own thing. One other thing I want to point out with what Joe was saying, where people go out and kind of solve their own problem, is that you really do get that. I just lost my train of thought. It's really exciting, though. It seems like it happens in the newer communities where the things aren't well established necessarily. And as much as we talk about JavaScript being an old and established community that's been around for 20 years, at the same time, I mean, the landscape of what we're dealing with in JavaScript has changed a lot. And in a lot of ways, it's more like a new community than an old one, especially with the Node.js and the way that it's come up. The stuff that you can do with it and the fact that it runs on the server has brought people in from other communities. And it's not the old 20-year-old JavaScript community. It's the new, we're working on something cool that runs on the server JavaScript community. And so they are innovating in a lot of ways and moving very quickly with it, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. AJ says that it's a community of amateurs a lot. And I think that also kind of sums it up well, that even though it's been around for a long time, there's lots of fresh stuff happening. I don't know.
Right. Well, the thing is the JavaScript community with things like Backbone.js and Ember.js and all of these different MVC frameworks, that kind of take advantage of some of the things that jQuery has given us. I mean, it's a new world out there for JavaScript. And as many people as are out there writing, the little script tags with 4 or 5 lines in it like they did in the 90s to animate something or move something or put a click handler in there. Nowadays we're seeing a community of people who are writing whole applications in JavaScript. And we've said this before, but those kinds of things make it sort of a new community. And so they're solving new problems and moving quickly into new areas. And so I see where people are saying that the language has been around for 20 years, but at the same time, it doesn't feel that way all the time.
Yeah, because it's not until jQuery came around that I think people really started to become invested in the language. That's where it started a transition from a community of amateurs, people that were not willing to actually learn and to invest in JavaScript, to starting to get some people that wanted to design things in JavaScript rather than just throw some crap together.
Right.
And then Node has definitely taken that a huge step further, because it brought in smart people, like people from Ruby that had been invested in the language,
There were already smart people still, though.
Well, yeah, but it brought in a lot of them. Like jQuery didn't bring in like a lot of new smart people from other languages or other backgrounds. Node brought in people that primarily worked in C, that primarily worked with virtual machines, that primarily worked with Ruby, Like NPM is the result of looking at all the faults that Gem has had to go through as it's evolved, and then solving all of them from the get-go, and then solving a few new ones that were found out along the way.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree that if, say 2 years ago you were primarily working in C, that's evidence that you're really smart.
Right. But I think the quality of people that have come into JavaScript JavaScript has benefited probably more by Node than by just as much as HTML5.
That's an interesting statement.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how many people have come in over the last 10 or so years and really invested in JavaScript due to Node versus, other technology that's part of the JavaScript ecosystem.
Well, I guess we'll see some flames in the comments where people are like, AJ, you're an idiot. Blah, 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 blah. And then we'll know.
Yeah, I think part of what really drew people to Node was just that it provided an innovative way of solving the same problems that we've been solving for a long time. Because most of the systems out there that you use on the server are primarily procedural systems. I mean, even if you're looking at something like Rails where, you have the MVC and all that stuff going on, I mean, when it comes right down to it, it works through the system in a procedural manner. And this is more event-driven, and it's really an interesting way of tackling some of these problems that don't seem to fit well into the procedural area. And so I think what really happened was people saw it, they started experimenting with it to solve their problems and realized that it actually had a place in their ecosystem and infrastructure to build out what they needed to build. And so then people started investing in it because they wanted more power from it. They wanted to be able to do more things with it and solve the other problems that lend themselves well to it. And so I think that's how Node kind of grew into a first-class citizen in the server space.
I think Node is a funny cat because it just seems like such a mismatch. But I agree with you in some cases, Chuck, but I'd say it's possibly, I would think the reason's a little bit different. But the reason that Node has benefited us so much is because Node bringing JavaScript to the server side all of a sudden made a whole bunch of people that were really smart prick their ears up and say, really? That sounds really cool. And the people that go to are interested in new, exciting technologies. I mean, I wouldn't say they're smarter than people that aren't, but
they just have more time.
Community oriented.
I was going to say they just have more time than I do.
More time, yeah. Well, they're more community oriented and they're interested in solving problems, right? Hey, Node's doing something cool. I'm going to go check it out, and that makes me interested in. I'm checking out Node for a problem I have here at my company. And, I see Node has these other problems. So because I'm just that kind of person, I like to solve these problems. So I brought in Node, and now I'm going to solve some problems in Node and publish some stuff.
Yep.
So I think it's just those kind of people that are drawn to something like Node that have really benefited the JavaScript community as a whole.
Yeah, I agree, and I think similar things have happened in the web space due to things like jQuery and stuff, just kind of giving you a common denominator to work from.
I mean, I was really excited by what JavaScript could do on the browser, and that's what converted me to JavaScript. Not because in and of itself it seems like an amazing language, but because what I was allowed to do on the browser. But I think it's possible that a lot of people don't see the browser as being that exciting. Like they're not as that excited about solving a user's problems, but they're if they're excited about solving a corporate problem at their company, then Node can get you excited about that.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of what you said is more or less what I was trying to say. So, it's just interesting. And now that people are seeing it as part of their infrastructure, they're willing to invest in it. And so the JavaScript community has gone from a way of dealing with the deficiencies of HTML in one way or another to an actual fully blown part of your architecture of your system.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. Have you ever taught someone to program using JavaScript that didn't already know how to program? Because as JavaScript is more and more popular, it seems like people are coming to JavaScript as their first language more. But it definitely has some quirks relative to other languages. But I wonder if you don't know anything about programming, does that even matter? Like maybe lexical scoping is just makes sense to you because you don't know any other way or something.
Well, I think I would not recommend that someone go into JavaScript unguided as their first language because of the community of amateurs thing. They're going to find W3 schools and they'll be like, oh yeah, this has all the best tutorials, And things like that, where they're going to end up finding that the most popular solutions when they Google are going to be some of the worst implementations you could possibly decide on. So I would recommend some other language that has had a more structured community like Golang or Rails or Python, where they do have some agreement on what path you should take and what is idiomatic in that language. Because in JavaScript, like we were saying earlier, people just can't make up their minds on what's an idiomatic use of the language, and there's a lot of conflicting opinions, and worse, there's a lot of amateur opinions that just bear no relevance.
So I kind of agree with you, AJ, to definitely a certain point. Although for a related reason, and that is, I think that JavaScript lacks, by and large, across the community as a whole, a lot of engineering rigor that exists in other places because of that, amateur view of the world that we have. That it's a large community of amateurs, and so coming to JavaScript first means you're not going to see much in the way of engineering discipline. Where if you go to one of the stodgier languages like Java or .NET, and I don't want to lump Rails in that group, but Rails has a large, very engineering-oriented community, then that's good because that's, helps you be a better programmer, and that doesn't exist very, very much in the JavaScript world. So that's a good reason not to start with JavaScript. But I think it's still an awesome language to learn as long as you can learn engineering discipline when you're going along.
Right. So if you have a guide.
Yeah, I think
you have a guide.
I think another thing that is interesting when you're talking about this is that I think it's important for people to learn object-oriented things, and I think it's also important that they learn some of the other ways of tackling some of these different things, like maybe go learn a functional language or something. And so if you get into a highly OO language, like Ruby, and then go learn a functional language like Lisp or Scheme or Clojure or something, then you can start to see what the trade-offs are, and then you can kind of get a feel for the prototypal / semi-functional / screwed up object-oriented nature of JavaScript. You can see why it's different, where it's different, and how to deal with it, how to compensate for some of the deficiencies that it has for certain problems, and why those are strengths for other problems, and really get a feel for it. But the fact that you have so many different ideas diluted into JavaScript, it makes it a really hard place to start. And so for that reason, I would take somebody through some of these other languages so that they really understand object orientation, then they really understand functional programming, and then they get into JavaScript and they really kind of go, okay, well, these parts are kind of like what you get out of Lisp, and these parts are kind of like what you get out of one of these OO languages like Java or Ruby, and then you can go, okay, so now that I understand these other principles, then I can pick things apart and see why I want to use this piece here and that piece there.
So, and to counter my previous argument, there are two things that I think are exceptionally good about JavaScript. One is that on every computer, you don't need to install anything to begin using it because you've always got, Firefox or Chrome or Safari. You'll hardly ever run into a computer that only has Internet Explorer. So you've got something that can run real JavaScript. And then if you're doing networking like a chat server, there's nothing better to start with than Node because it makes networking so dirt simple. It just takes out all the confusion and the select and the trying to understand how to manage the multiple connections. If you want to get into something that's networking, I think that Node.js has got the best avenue of access because you're probably going to come across some good tutorials if that's what you're coming in through. And it's just so simple. Whereas with Ruby, even building a chat server is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I can see that, especially where you have things like in Ruby, for example, you have Event Machine, but it's just it's not as simple, it's not as clean as doing it in Node.js.
Yeah.
Well, it's an abstraction built on top of the language, whereas in Node it's in the language, it's part of what comes built in.
It looks like Joe has to take off. Do you want to give us your picks real quick, Joe?
Oh yeah, cool. My two picks for this week are the Penny Arcade Expo PAX, which is going on starting tomorrow. And if you're hearing about it for the first time now, it's far too late to be there, but it's just an awesome gaming expo with consoles and PC, computer gaming and tabletop gaming and everything put on by the Penny Arcade guys. And then my other pick is Will Wheaton, who I follow on Twitter, and he just does cool stuff, talks about lots of cool stuff. His tabletop YouTube series is really fun. And those are my two picks.
Awesome. All right,
I don't know who Will Wheaton is, but he seems like some kind of nerd god.
So sad.
I don't know.
You don't know who Will Wheaton is?
That's so sad.
He's too young.
Why he's so famous.
My gosh.
He must be too young. Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh, is he that little
Wesley Crusher? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's so sad, Jameson.
But
I still don't know who he is.
Everyone else on Star Trek isn't worshipped by nerds all around the world. Why is he so worshipped?
LeVar Burton has a pretty good following.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
but he also has a Reading Rainbow going for him.
Right.
Who's the Asian guy that also appears on Psych at the Comic-Con? Has a Pinterest account that everyone follows?
I'm trying to remember. He plays Hikaru Sulu, right?
Yeah.
In the original series.
I don't know.
George Takei, yeah.
Yeah,
That sounds right.
Yeah, he is. He's really cool.
His Pinterest is hilarious.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those interesting people to follow. But yeah, so I don't know. I kind of off and on like Will Wheaton. So yeah, it just depends. But anyway. All right. Well, thanks for coming, Joe. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, thanks.
So anyway, what were we talking about before?
We were kind of talking about learning JavaScript and whether you should or shouldn't do it as a first language, or how to help people out with it. One thing that's really awesome is the Khan Academy computer science stuff. That's all in JavaScript, and it's all really interactive. So if you guys have watched that,
Khan Academy.
Do you not know what Khan Academy is?
No.
Oh, well, now I get to make fun of you for not knowing what something is. It's this online. It's not as structured as like Coursera or Udacity or these university ones, but it's just a bunch of online video tutorials for learning like math or science or something.
Oh, okay.
And the guy that started Sal Khan is pretty famous and has taken a lot of money from Bill Gates' charity foundation, I think, to get it up and running. But he has a computer science section that is the code is JavaScript, and then there's like a canvas on the other side, and you can kind of hover over variables and click and drag them to shrink and grow the little drawings that you're doing on the side. It's kind of like that Inventing on Principle talk that was out last year that kind of made the rounds. So this is all JavaScript, right? But it's done in a way that it makes it really immediate. The feedback on what you're doing, you can see it right away. And I think there are definitely environments like this in other languages, but that's one good thing about learning JavaScript is that you can do really visual things and get more feedback that can maybe excite people more. Okay. So I posted a link to this, and you guys should all check it out if you haven't seen it yet.
I was hoping that Khan Academy was related to Star Trek too.
Well, maybe it's like the 6 degrees of Star Trek or something. Everything is related to Star Trek if you follow some chain.
There you go. All right. Well, so one thing that kind of came out that while we were talking that I wanted to ask about then was if you're getting into JavaScript and you want kind of that first project to kind of get going in it, is the chat server kind of a good first step, or is there something simpler maybe that you could try out, or what?
I think it depends on your background. If you know just zero about programming, then no. And if you know nothing at all about server-side stuff or networking at all, it might be a little tough to just put it together on your own. There are some tutorials. It's kind of like the To-Do app version for Node, that there are just a bajillion tutorials for chat servers. So those might be good to follow along with. But
I think that if you don't use anonymous functions and you use functions, if you get rid of anonymous functions and you're not too familiar with programming, I think that the Node.js chat server thing could be pretty simple, but most of the examples I've seen use anonymous functions, and I think that's a little bit confusing to follow when you're not even familiar with the concept of function yet.
Right.
But I don't think nested functions is much harder to understand. That to me, that seems very intuitive. It's just, if you logically nest something, then it's going to get used where it's nested. I don't think that's too difficult. And I do think that if you don't know too much about networking, then the JavaScript Node.js examples are easier to understand because it's just like a coffee shop. I mean, you can go through the coffee shop analogy, that little article, and kind of explain it that way, and then it makes a lot of sense. Whereas
knows what you're talking about.
Your coffee shop doesn't use two-phase commits article. I'm pretty sure I've posted this before, but I find it.
But there are hopefully other people listening to this besides me, and they might not know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So if you Google your coffee shop doesn't use two-phase commits, then you come up with this PDF, which is just a beautiful explanation of event-based design, and basically gives the example if you walk into Starbucks, you order your coffee, you sit down, then you get an event callback when your coffee's ready, rather than you walk up to the register, you wait and wait and wait and wait in blocking fashion until your coffee is ready, then pay, then sit down.
I don't drink coffee, but I have been to coffee shops that function in both ways. So anyway, yeah, that makes sense. What about on the browser? Is there kind of a generally accepted first application that you ought to build on your browser? Is it the To-Do app, or is that too complicated?
That's like an MVC learning how to use it thing.
That's kind of the way it struck me too.
Are you talking about people that don't know JavaScript or don't know programming? Because
JavaScript, don't know JavaScript. Because don't know programming, you start with kind of the same kinds of things, the hello worlds and the basic variable manipulation and stuff like that. But if you're trying to learn JavaScript in earnest and you say you're at least halfway decent in some other language.
That is a good question. I don't really have an answer to that. It seems like you
Crockford.
want to... Well, yeah, he's talking about a project, not a person to stuff from.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe you could do some really basic, just DOM manipulation stuff without jQuery. But
right. Do something like a bingo game or something where you press a button and it brings up a number and then you click on the number to put a thing on it or something.
Yeah, something that has events somehow and something where you have to select DOM elements.
Yeah.
You know, it's really fun. Reinvent a game like Catchphrase or one of those personality tests, because then it's something that you get to share with someone else and they kind of immediately get it. If you do something like Catchphrase, then you have a really fun time because you get to re-implement or you get to implement things using the HTML5, like the audio API for the buzzer, and do a ticker. And so something like Catchphrase is really, really cool to do in JavaScript. And it's not complicated. You just have a word bank, and then, you press a button for team A, a button for team B, and then a button to start, stop, pause the buzzer.
Right. That makes sense. Huh. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time. It'd be really interesting to talk about like the code exercises kind of things that we're talking about now, where it's, what kind of apps do you build for practice, or what kind of, problems do you go out and find and solve? Do you do Conway's Game of Life or something else, and kind of, learn how to program, or in some cases learn how to program.
Hey, Jameson, did you do Conway's Game of Life?
I did. I don't think I ever got it hooked up to Canvas though. It took the game itself is like 5 lines of an if-else statement. And that's pretty much it.
Oh, wow.
It's just literally, if these squares have these designs, then do this kind of thing. So it's not very hard. But I don't know. Maybe I should put it on some Canvas stuff. But I kind of abandoned that. That was the first thing I ever did in CoffeeScript, though.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap this up and get some picks out. AJ, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll do that. First off, I have a pro tip for you. If you're ever eating a banana, eat it like a monkey. Instead of trying to peel it from the top, if you just pinch the bottom, it'll split open. So when you get one of those bananas that's a little bit too green on the top, and you're like yanking at it, and all you're really doing is like mushing the banana. Instead, if you just take the bottom and pinch it, it'll split right open.
Okay, I'm 5 years old. I just laughed when you said pinch the bottom.
Well, that's okay. You can do that.
I was thinking about when you said eat it like a monkey. I'm like, what? Hold it with my foot?
You could potentially do that if you have an opposable thumb on your foot. Yeah.
I'm gonna get surgically altered so I can do that then.
That's what they did in that one movie. I don't remember the name of it. Aeon Flux. Yeah. It's like a wannabe Matrix. Wasn't really all that great. Anyway,
it wasn't great. Yeah.
And then my other pick is a local pawn shop. It's called Minuteman Pawn, and it's in Orem on State Street at about 900 South. And if you want any audio equipment, there's a guy named Alan there. Way cool guy. Knows a lot of stuff. I do a little DJing on the side, so I've gone there to buy stuff from him, and I go there a lot just to BS and, kind of keep the friendship going and whatnot. And then it's totally transformed since this new company bought it and rebranded it like a year ago. And I just got a MacBook Pro from there as well, and I paid $1,068.50 for it. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Nice.
Should have haggled him down by 50 cents.
I haggled him down by $500. So
$500.50.
I know, Jameson, you totally got taken. All right, Jameson, your picks.
My first one is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. It's a version of this really old first-person shooter game called Counter-Strike, which came out in 1999, and Valve just released a new version that's pretty similar, but it's just like the purest, most, I don't know, it doesn't have any gimmicks where you have to unlock stuff or it's just all about the gameplay. And it's really well made and it's pretty cheap. I think it's only $15. So I've been spending a lot of time with that. We've been playing it a lot at work and have had a great time. I said my first pick. I think that's my only pick. I didn't really run across too much other stuff this week. I started doing some freelancing, so I don't have too much time anymore. But yeah, so that's it.
Awesome. So I guess it's my turn for picks. Dang, I've been so busy lately. I just haven't even had time to think about it.
Pick AJ and I.
Yeah, there we go. My favorite co-hosts.
Woohoo!
All right. Well,
yeah, screw that Joe guy now that he left.
Yeah.
We can talk about him behind his back.
So have I talked about OmniFocus yet?
I think so.
Okay. Let's see. What am I using these days? I could talk about what I use to back up my computer because I'm really happy with it. One of them is Time Machine. And the cool thing about Time Machine, it's built into the Mac. You don't actually have to do anything. I have an external drive sitting behind my computer that I ordered off of Amazon. I don't remember what brand it is. I don't think it really makes a huge difference. But yeah, it just backs up my computer every day, and I probably have about 30 days worth of backups on it. And so if I ever have to roll something back, I can, which is really what it's there for. And then I have an offsite backup with Mozy. That's Mozy. Now I have to put a disclaimer out there. I actually used to work for Mozy. This was back when the company had a soul.
Ouch.
Yeah. But anyway, I like the service. I know how it works, and I'm pretty confident in the fact that it can deliver for me. So that's what I use to back up my machine, my work machine. And yeah, and then if the machine gets stolen or my house burns down or something, I can just get another machine and restore everything off of Mozy. So I think that's kind of the best approach for most people, is to kind of have a two-tiered system, at least 2 tiers, where one is a local backup and the other is a remote backup. I also use Dropbox and stuff to kind of store some of the stuff that I need to share between computers. And so you can think of that as kind of a backup, but it's not the same thing. And yeah.
Have you looked at the Amazon Glacier thing that just came out a couple weeks ago? Where it's really cheap for storing tons of data, but if you want to get more, there's some limit to how much you can get out a month. It's like a few gigabytes a month. So it's basically just for really long-term backup of tons and tons of data. So if you have like a terabyte of photos or something, you can just put them all in Glacier and it'll be, I don't know, $20 a year or something like that.
I'll have to look at that.
But then if you need to download them all and you do it all like as fast as possible, it's super expensive. So you kind of have to limit how fast you retrieve data from it.
Right. That's interesting. I'll have to check that out. Anyway, so those are my picks. And I don't know that we have any announcements. So
I did want to pick one other thing.
Okay.
So because you were talking about backup, Western Digital just released recently a 2 terabyte, 2.5 inch drive. And that's pretty amazing because that's pretty much a little bit beyond the theoretical limit of what people believed you could fit on a 2.5 inch magnetic media. And Seagate's supposed to be coming out with something that's heat and magnet based that's going to be able to exceed 2 terabytes. But 2 terabytes is kind of like you can't get any bigger on a 2.5. So
that's awesome.
Probably won't see anything bigger than that for a couple of years until Seagate gets their stuff figured out. And they say that might take a decade.
To the uninitiated, the 2.5 inch are the ones that go in the laptops.
Yeah, and the ones that are like the passports or the ones you get at Walmart that are your carry with you backup device or whatever. Also, Western Digital drives, they fail just like any other drive. All rotational media sucks. But Western Digital has the easiest, simplest, pain-free way of getting your warranty return. You just type in the serial number online and you click send me a new drive. You back up your old drive or do whatever, then you send in your old drive. If you don't send in your old drive, then you get charged like a buttload of money because they'll charge you above retail price for their drive. But you have 30 days to send back your old drive.
Oh, nice.
And I think you have 120 days to send it in actually, but then they charge you like a $20 restocking fee or like you sent it in too late fee kind of thing.
Right.
But I just love Western Digital because I buy a lot of their drives, and whenever they fail, I send them in and they give me one, and they don't hassle me. I don't have to run like disk diagnostics and have to like boot into Windows and all that stuff. They trust me. If I say the drive's failed and it has bad sectors, I check the box bad sectors, I click send me a new one. They do it. Love it.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this show up. Thank our listeners for listening. We'll catch